morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I was worried that 10:30 might be too early for everybody's recovery from last night. We all kind of chipper. So my name is Patrick Leonard, and I have the technology team with iTriage, which is a mobile app primarily for personal health care. So it's a consumer application to help people basically take control of their health. That's what we're all about. Why I'm here today is to talk to you about the experiences that we've had in growing our Rails organization. So this is the technology process and organization. I'm going to go through some things that basically are some of our experiences that I think will be helpful for all of you. So this whole thing starts with the tail of the new product. How many people here have been involved in the creation of a new product from the early stage? Yeah, right, almost everybody. Probably multiple times for a lot of you. And so the tail kind of goes pretty much the same way in most cases. You know, first you have the brilliant idea, right? The epiphany, moment of inspiration, shower moment, whatever it is. The great idea for the new thing. And so then you assemble your core team, right? Your best, sharpest people, and get the initial group together, and start doing the prototype, proof of concept, the first group to flesh out the idea and say, is this thing really going to work? And then the next stage is you start rushing to market. You got to get your initial customers. You got to build out the first release of the product, your minimum viable product, all that sort of stuff. And this is the stage where sometimes you might be tempted to cut a corner or two, or might be pressured by some of the investors, whatever the case may be, to kind of rush things. We always want to do things the right way from the very beginning, but in the heat of the moment, trying to get to market quickly, sometimes we make early design decisions that later we have to come back and sort of fix. So then if things go well, you get your first customers, your first revenue, you get to go out and get some more investors, and then it's time to grow, right? This is the stage that we get to, things go really well. But then growth comes with the challenges itself. And first thing is, and this is a great problem to have, right? You've got users now. You've got customers. You've got investors. And so users want more features. Customers want more users, depending on what your business model is, and want more features. And then your investors want more everything, right? So it's great we've gotten to this first stage, but now there's pressure for more features. So we say, okay, great, let's hire some more software engineers, grow up the group, start adding more features, and then almost inevitably, not inevitably, hopefully we find some ways to avoid this, but frequently, then you start incurring code debt, technical debt, things start slowing down, and as code debt increases, productivity decreases, and hopefully you never get to the point where you kind of plateau, but that happens, right? I'm sure you can all think of examples that you know of, you've been a part of, or you've seen where that happens, right? So to the interesting part of this, hopefully, how do you grow? How do you avoid that? And so iTriage started about 3.5 years ago on a kitchen table, and in that time has grown to be one of the leading healthcare applications for consumers. We've got 5 million plus downloads so far, and we're a pretty good clip. And so we've had to do a lot to meet that growth. And not just hire more people, which of course is the most important part of it, but we also have to do a lot to make it so that the new people that come into the engineering group can actually be productive and can do interesting creative things and not feel like they're getting stuck. So I just kind of want to share with you all some of our experiences, things that we've done that I'm proud of, things that we've done that maybe would be lessons learned that you could avoid. So that's kind of what we're here for. So how have we architected for growth? So we, like a lot of companies, when we built the first version of it, it was just as I described. We were getting the initial features together, and I think the initial team did a really good job, but they made some early design decisions that some of which were appropriate at the time, but need to be changed later for the product to scale, and some of which were just things that it's hard to see forward sometimes. It's hard to predict 3 years into the future. It's hard to, when you have the first version of the product, it's hard to think, well, what's this going to be like when we have 5 million downloads, right? You don't really always have the luxury of doing that. So what we've gone through and done in the last, I guess, a little over a year since I've been there, and most of our team, our Rails team is here, and most of them have joined in that time. we've gone through and really re-looked at three major areas. One is our technical architecture, and I'll actually spend the bulk of the time talking about that. The second is our processes, so our development processes and release management processes and what we're doing there. And I'm sure we all have some really interesting conversations about that, with beers afterward. I'd love to hear what you all are doing. And then third is hiring strategies and what we can do there. In the technical architecture, we've done a lot to re-architect the product. Now, I wouldn't say that it's as much as we'd like to do, right? You always want to do more, but we've really tried to spend a lot of time investing in re-architecting, refactoring, redesign, and there are really two main drivers for that. The first is enabling high-quality mobile apps. So for us, that's iOS, Android, and web. And those are really, iTriage is first and foremost a mobile app, and the Rails platform is an enabler of that, right? It's where actually the bulk of the functionality of iTriage actually comes from our Rails app, and it comes through our iPhone and Android app. So it's a really critical part of what we do. And so we really think that in terms of how is this going to help make our mobile apps better. And then the second is for the Rails app itself, how do we prepare for growth in the Rails app and in the code base and for the team. Second point is process development processes and release management processes. We've done a ton of retooling. This is something that we're never happy with. I think we do a pretty good job with it, but we're always trying to improve it. We're always trying to do better. And then the third point is recruiting and hiring strategies. So on the technical architecture, we really kind of attacked this in two phases. When we first started looking at this a little over a year ago, so in iTriage, there's a bunch of clinical functionality, symptoms, diseases, medical procedures, medications. All of that for us is stored on the iPhone and on the Android device. And then there's our provider database. So we've got over 1 million healthcare providers in our database. Obviously, that's too big to put on a device database, so that's up on the server. And the way that was initially designed is with web views embedded in the mobile app, which at the time was fine, right? That was a pretty expedient way to do it, and performance wasn't too bad. But what that did as we grew was created a tight coupling between the mobile app and the Rails platform on the server side. And we started getting to the point where we had pretty challenging releases because we were trying to do iPhone, Android, and Rails releases together, right? So one of the very first things that we did after I joined with the other guys on the team is we said, well, let's introduce loose coupling between the apps and server side. So that was kind of lesson one for us, is putting APIs on the Rails app that our mobile apps can talk to. That's now, pretty common practice, and I think if you guys are building a brand new app from scratch, that's probably what you're already doing. For us, we had to go back and retool some stuff to do that. Now that's our MO now. We build everything that way. We have to do some re-architecture for that. Works great, and obviously that's the way forward. And so for us, the goal is to really move those revenues in favor of native views for iOS and Android. That's not anything against HTML5. I don't want to, there's a lot of heated discussion about native versus HTML5 on mobile apps. They're both great approaches. What I would suggest is trying to go one way or the other, right? We ended up in a position where we had to make sure of the two, and I think that's not really optimal, but I'm pretty careful about it. But an all-native app or an all-HTML5 app, you can make it really good, so that's the direction we're headed. And then on the web app side, we're moving away from views on the Rails side and basically making our whole Rails app headless. So it's going to be all APIs. We're actually pretty close to that now. We're about to release a web app that's HTML5 JavaScript and completely detached from the Rails platform. That's really exciting. We'll kind of screenshot it now. We're going to be releasing that pretty soon. And so basically the web app will behave very much like the The result of that has been shorter release cycles. So we were able to actually take our iPhone and Android release cycles from about 3 months. We were doing updates on the mobile apps about every 3 months to now 3 weeks. We update our iPhone and Android app every 3 weeks. And this was really a critical piece of it. I don't think we could have done it without doing that. We also did a lot of surveys of our user base. Because we weren't really sure what's the right frequency to release, right? How often is too often for, you look at your app store and you get a badge, you've got 800 updates, and you think, oh, geez, I got to do this again. So, we didn't want to do it too frequently, so we surveyed our user base and we found that around 3 weeks is probably as short as we want to do it. So we release iPhone and Android every 3 weeks, and then we do a similar cycle on Rails, and I'll talk about that in a little more detail in just a minute. So this is just a simple example of our medications endpoint. This is obviously a jQuery JavaScript request. We do equivalent requests in iOS and Android. It's a basic AJAX call. And then you get back a JSON response. And it'll come back in light or full. So on our medications endpoint as an example, you can do the request for light, which is this response, which is just an ID and a name, which is great for list views and that sort of thing. And then we also support a full response, which is the entire line graph, right? And so all the information about medication is actually provided as stuff there, so we don't have back every single response. And so that's good for our detailed views. This is good for our list views. So that's just a simple example of what one of those looks like. Then we started to set about putting this coupling into the Rails app itself. And so this is a work in progress. We've actually made a lot of progress on it. This is our pattern now. It's built this way, and then we're in the process of retooling some of the older functionalities for this model as well. But basically, we're creating separate functional modules in separate Rails apps. So basically, new features that are of any substantial size get built as a new Rails app. Obviously, if it's an extension of something existing, change to a model or a new controller or something like that, it goes into the current app. But if it's something that's decent size, it goes into a new Rails app, and then each of those apps has its own API, and of course, Rails support for REST and JSON. They usually help on this. It's really, really nice. And so this is already been really helpful for us because again, for the first couple of years, it wasn't a big deal. It was all in one app, and that was fine. And there were just 2 or 3 people working on it, and that all worked great. But once we got the team to code base to a certain size, having it all in a single app really started to be cumbersome. And so splitting out into separate apps, we can actually do separate releases when we want to. We don't have to release the whole thing all at once. As long as the API is clean and versioned, then we can actually do separate releases for the separate apps. We tend to release them together most of the time. But it's really reduced butterfly bugs, butterfly effect kind of situations where you change something over here and you get a random bug over there, and where did that come from? When the code base gets to a certain size, those kind of things are harder to catch and harder to plan for. And it's also shortened up the learning curve for new developers, new software engineers that come on board. Instead of having to learn one big code base, they can focus in one area, really get their head around that, and then move on. So I think it's really helped a lot. It's also helped us in releasing our app, but also updating Rails. So when we moved to Rails 3, so a lot of you have the same experience. I saw the show of hands in the keynote yesterday. When we moved to Rails 3, it was hard. It was a huge project. It took a lot of time and a huge amount of effort. And basically, ate up most of the team's time for a period of time. And we really wanted to set up so that future Rails updates would be easier. And so far they have been. We'll see what happens with Rails 4. But with the interim updates, this definitely helped out quite a bit. So this is a high-level view of the product architecture for iTriage. So the way we do this is, as I said, we've got the native iPhone and Android apps and web app that all call through an API proxy on the front end into the Rails backend. And we introduced that policy when we started doing the separate web apps, because otherwise you start getting into cross-site scripting problems and that sort of thing. So that gives us one clean entry point to the API. And then in the Rails platform itself, we have a logical separation. These are not physically separate groups, but logical, I suppose they could be. A logical separation between these shared services, which are things like authentication, user profile, location, search, things that are shared across featured areas. And then functional modules, things that I talked about before, like clinical, so looking up symptoms, what doctors call diseases. We're actually renaming that to conditions because, for example, as my wife would point out, pregnancy is not actually a disease. So this is this one, so we're calling those conditions going forward. Then there are medical procedures, there are medications, we've got a pretty comprehensive medications database. Then there are providers that I talked about before. We've got over 1 million healthcare providers in our database. It's basically all the doctors, hospitals, urgent care facilities, government clinics that we can find in the country. And then also we have hospital listings in 14 other countries. We're working hard to internationalize the app and make it more localized. And then scheduling is another area. So that's set an appointment to get a doctor. So you can go into iTriage and actually find a doctor, make an appointment with them right through the app. If any of you have worked on scheduling apps before, see an eye roll there. Yeah, it can get kind of complex and convoluted. Even if it's done well, it's complicated stuff. So that's kind of its own thing, but it's very tightly interwoven with the provider's functionality. And then news feeds is something we added to the product. So this is like if any of you use LinkedIn, how they do the news feed within LinkedIn, you have the different categories. We did something very similar in iTriage, but it's health news. And so we have men's health and women's health and children's and senior and a bunch of different categories, and you can indicate which ones you want to see. And so that was built as a separate app. And the ones with asterisks up there are the ones that either are already as separate Rails apps or are in the process right now of doing so. And then we're on these other ones as well. And then down below is our analytics, business intelligence, big data platform. Actually, the big data piece we're just in the process of adding and build that on Elastic Mappers. That's a whole separate talk, but really cool stuff, and we're really excited about that. And then that little piece right there in the corner, it says integration. You can't read it. In healthcare, as Rails developers, we all love dealing with nice RESTful endpoints and JSON structures and objects and stuff. And in healthcare, most of the data is not like that. If you're lucky enough that it's not in a paper file and it's somewhere electronic, it's probably in an older file format like HL7. And so we have an integration engine outside of the Rails app. It deals with all those old funky file formats, and it provides a nice RESTful API back to the Rails platform, so a Rails team doesn't have to deal with those formats. They just talk to that interface. But we're still able to interface with all the old funky healthcare apps that are out there. And it's really an important part of what we're building. And then the underlying all this is our SysOps and DevOps environment. And the way we do this is on the app side, we've got a build server for iOS and Android. We have used some standard tools. There's some good tools out there. We ultimately decided to build some things ourselves for both iOS and Android. So we've got build servers that can be driven automatically, but also like a web interface with our product manager and our QA teams to make their own builds for testing. And then on the Rails side, we do automation with Chef, monitoring, CI with Jenkins, and a variety of different automated test tools. Some for Rails, some for iOS, some for Android. So we kind of have to have a mix of different tools to cover everything. And then monitoring on the big data and analytics platform, and then kind of a pretty typical list of tools for internal use. GitHub, Campfire for group chat, Visual Tracker. And then we actually use Google Apps for a Gmail shop. And so instead of putting together a wiki, we actually use Google Docs for, most of our documentation is in the READMEs and the repo and that sort of thing. But when we need a design document or something like that, we use Google Apps for that instead of a wiki. And that works pretty well. You can end up with the same spaghetti in the wiki if you're not careful, but it's pretty nice for being able to share things around, and especially for collaborating with product managers. And you can also attach those into stories and visuals, so that works pretty well too. So that's kind of our basic layout there. For process, our main goals for improving process were to increase our velocity, continue to improve quality, and then to also have time for people to be able to continue to learn new skills and development. So one of the key things that we did was we moved to frequent fixed date releases, which that probably sounds really obvious to everybody, but when you have a mobile app, it's a little bit harder for the reasons I was talking about before. So we used to release our iOS and Android apps every 3 or 4 months. And after surveying our users and getting comfortable with a 3-week time frame, that was really kind of what we anchored everything around. So we said, let's release those mobile apps every 3 weeks, and then we had to kind of back into our Rails planning schedule in the same way. And I'll talk in a second about specifically how we do that. But that really gave us a much smoother release management and development process. And then, just kind of simple things, last year started to do all the sort of good stuff for us and a lot of like detailed process improvements like that help out a lot. So we increased our velocity and actually hit our release dates on a regular basis, which is also nice because it gets you a little more political capital with the business side of the house and trust you and all those things. So that was pretty cool. So the way we do our release management, and this was something we really evolved into. We didn't do this great. I'd say the first year we were kind of really working through it. But I think our process now is pretty decent for having a mobile app and the Rails back end. So basically the way we do it is we've got a 3-week cycle on the apps. So you got a little over 2 weeks of actual development time and then 3 days release. And then upstream of that, we put the Rails platform on a 3-week cycle as well. We actually release it every week, but we do iteration planning every 3 weeks on Rails so that it matches the app side. So that way, if somebody says, hey, we need a new feature in iPhone and Android, and that feature has a dependency to making a change to the API in Rails, then we schedule in the Rails iteration, and then we know at the end of that 3 weeks, that API will get updated. In the intervening time, we're doing updates for other things in Rails, for anything that goes into the API, that goes on the 3-week schedule so that the app developers know when it's coming and they know when they can start their work. And so then they typically will start, around late week 2 when things are starting to get solid, then they'll start working on the iPhone and Android side, build against that API in development staging, and then they can go on with theirs. And then in the 3rd week of each cycle, on the Monday we do iteration planning with product managers, and on the Friday after the release, we release on Thursdays. On the Friday after the release, then we do our iteration committee. So that's kind of our basic process, and we moved to that last year, and it's been working really well. And actually, I think we're pretty close to the point where, at least in the Rails apps, we could probably be releasing more often than weekly. I think we'll be pretty close to being able to release as often as daily if we want to. For the business, they don't really care. Weekly is plenty fast for almost anything we need to deal with, but I think it's still, easier for keeping quality up and just, making those iterations smaller and smaller. So we'll kind of tighten that up. On the app side, I think we'll probably stick on 3 weeks. I don't think people want shorter than that. And so then, in the process and organization, this is an area. It's not as much fun to talk about because we all like things to be writing code, but the reality is, if process and organization aren't set up right, you end up not spending as much time writing code because you're dealing with that stuff, right? So we really try to retool this as we're growing. This is an area of big growing pains, right? This is something we really haven't worked through, and continue to, right? As the team grows, we continue to retool this and hopefully. But basically, the goal is to continue to grow with minimal layers, right? Without having lots and lots of management. And so what I really wanted is an organization driven by technology leadership and not as much of sort of classical management. So what we did is align the group based on essentially the API separations, right? So we've got our Rails team, our apps team, and our apps team is iPhone, Android, and web. So our web app, because it's unintrusive JavaScript, it's not actually tied to the server side, it's tied to the app side. And then infrastructure and analytics in another group, and then QA across all the groups. So that's how we line that up. And so far, it's allowed us to keep a pretty flat organization. Now we've more than doubled in size this last year. We're supposed to double again this year. Once you get to a certain size, you have to have some amount of layers. I think it's pretty difficult to keep it totally flat forever. But so far, that's worked pretty good. And then for recruiting and hiring, there's just a couple of things I wanted to say about this. For us, it's attitude and aptitude, as anybody would say. Obviously, we want to have people who are great at their craft, or creative thinkers, who love to build things. But the attitude and cultural fit is really important because for us, working on a healthcare-related app and trying to fix a really significant sort of broken system in the country, people, we really want to find people who are passionate about the technology, but also passionate about what we're building with it. Because for us, that's a really critical part of it. So that's really what we're looking for. And then in our interviewing, we really try to put an emphasis on sit down with people and actually building things. Obviously, there's time to talk to you, but also time to sit down and write some code as well. And that's all I'll say about that part. So, why do we work on this project, right? Why am I here? Why are we all working on this? And there's a few fundamental things that we really believe. And I can tell you, I've been doing this for a while. It's not very often you get to work on something that you not only love the technology you're working on, but you're also really excited about what you're building. So I feel very fortunate to be able to do that. There's kind of a couple core things here. One is we believe that people should have immediate access to health information at their fingertips, right? Whenever they need it, wherever they need it. There have been a lot of improvements in this over the last 5 years, 10 years. It's much more accessible through a variety of tools like iTriage, other health apps, search engines. It's much better than it was. There's still so much more progress that can be made in this area. So we're continuing to work on this. I think it's kind of the foundation of it. The second piece is we believe that people should have control of their own and their family's health data. This is something that very little progress has been made on so far. Think about it. How many people in this room have access to their own health records? So, 2, okay? And you guys live in the U.S.? Well, there are other countries that have a little bit better handle on it than we do, and there's some that don't. But my health records are spread across paper files in doctor's offices going back to when I was a kid. And, they're starting to get more electronic. There are things that are happening in the private sector and the public sector, both that are moving in the right direction. But right now, this is a mess. Right? So, and it's kind of a core thing, right? Why Facebook works is because all the users can put their own information in, right? That's not the case in healthcare, right? Most of us don't have that information. We depend on the doctor, the hospital, the labs, and everybody else. And when you don't have that data, then the whole system becomes opaque. You have no control over it. You depend on those people. So we're really trying to be part of helping people break out of that cycle, and it really kind of goes to the third point, which is that we believe the healthcare system is broken, and the way to fix it is to empower consumers. Right? So there's government policy stuff, there's private sector, business stuff, and some of those things that are happening are really good and they're important. Put a win in our sales for what we're doing. But we think that ultimately putting this into the hands of people is the most important part, because once people see what's possible, wow, I could actually control my own health data. Wow, I can walk into the doctor's office and actually already kind of know what's wrong with me. That is going to get people to realize what's possible, right? And once people realize what's possible, they're going to demand more, right? They're going to expect more. And the system, even if you have a great doctor, probably a lot of you have awesome doctors who really love and do a great job. It's not the doctors, it's the system, right? You can have great care for an individual physician. The system is not there. And so that's really, we're trying to just meet this goal to turn this thing around. And it's not going to happen overnight, but I think we're making progress on it. So that's why we're here. And we are growing a little pitch here. We are growing and hiring. So if any of you or if you know people who might be interested in talking to us, we're not just growing the Rails team, but our whole engineering group is scheduled to double this year. And we're moving some really fun office space. We've renovated an old historic building in downtown Denver, just a few blocks from Tourist Field. So we have a lot of fun moving in there next month. And so if you want to learn a little bit more, I'm available afterward. Please stop by our booth, grab any of the guys, learn more. You can also go to about.itriagehealth.com/jobs. There's several up there, and I've got several more that I need to post up there. There are a bunch more interesting things coming. And you can also reach me on Twitter. My handle is Leonard, and I think we've got some time for some questions. Thank you all so much for your time. That's a good question. The question was, what tools we use to document our API internally? This is something that we're working on right now, because we use the API internally right now, but we do have plans to externalize it. So to be very honest with you, our documentation is not great. because the app developer can walk over to the Rails guy and say, hey, what do I need to say to this? What am I going to do that? So we basically have dual sites right now. So we have internal private sites. So it's the equivalent of a wiki. It works fine, but it's not as structured as it needs to be. So we're looking at Mashery and some of those kind of tools to potentially do some more, but we haven't really settled on the final tool. But we will be taking our internal documentation and migrating that because it needs to be, obviously, it's not really well documented. That's what you guys use. Yes.
Do you have a nomenclature version that you follow, or
We do have a nomenclature for version, and I can answer that. We actually have a couple of guys who can answer you better. Mike, when you guys want to talk about how to do version?
Yeah, we actually created a Rails gem that it picks the version number from the route, and it creates an instance of a model. So we do the versioning in the models instead of in the controllers because it makes sense to have all the business in the models. And the gem figures out which model, which instance of the model instantiate, and it goes from there.
I'd like to break our internal app out into several apps like you do and talk to each other.
We recommend reading. You know, we went, so I'll give you an answer now, so I want to give a couple of you guys a chance to give their perspective on this too. You know, we went really back and forth for a while about how to do this. And at first we said, well, let's build separate Rails apps. And no, let's do engines. No, let's do apps. And we kind of talked about a variety of different things. And then we started to do a separate app. And we started having the cross-site scripting things. And then we jammed it into an engine. Then we broke it back up. And that was kind of the journey that we went through. And then ultimately we said, well, obviously we just put the proxy in the front end and avoid all that nonsense. So that's where we ended up. But as far as how we got there, do you guys have any recommendations for resources to dig into this more? I don't know that I don't need any specific.
We didn't hear the
I'm sorry. Question was resources or sites or any place to go to read up more on how to break a Rails app into separate modules. Do you guys have any great sites or anything you found?
There was a talk at RubyConf last year that somebody gave on that topic. That's on the conf freaks. You can go check out for the 2011 RubyConf.
2011 conference?
Yeah, somebody gave a talk about how to break your Rails app into separate services. They talk about some of the issues they faced. So it's a good talk. Yeah, I recommend it.
You keep metrics on how many people actually update their Rails app, and you encourage people to update it.
So the question was, do we keep metrics on how many people update the iOS app? And can we course or encourage or force our users to do so? On the first question, we get that in a couple of different places. One is Apple and Google provide a lot of that. So the last, I don't know if I looked at the last one, but the update before was either 3 weeks ago or the one prior to that. We had in the first week after the update, I mean, you definitely see, it looks like this, right? So the first week after the update, we had about 1 million downloads. There were, most of those were existing users that updated, and then a lot of them were new downloads. So we had about 1 million in the first week, and then tapered off. We also have in our own internal clickstream functionality we built into both iPhone and Android apps. So our apps gather user actions, log them, and then report them up to our server. We can't see downloads that way. So the only way we can see a pure active download is from either Apple or Google or whoever else has the market. But we can see the first app launch. So most people download an app and then the first thing they do is open it, and we capture that first launch. But if somebody downloads the app and opens it, we would only see that from Apple and Google. I don't think that's a high percentage, but yeah, that's basically how we track those. And then we track the clickstream, all the actions, after that as well. The second part of the question, we don't do anything specific to force or encourage people to update. It's something that we've talked about doing. There's some things that we do a little bit different because of the nature of the data we deal with, because a lot of the content in here is general content, symptoms, disease, etc. But some of it is personal. And so we do have personal health information in the app. It's a HIPAA compliant app. And so we do, whenever we encounter kind of those collections, we have to approach it. I think there's a way that we could encourage people to update the app. We have to be a little bit careful about it because a lot of our usage is, you know, I just broke my leg or my daughter's sick and I'm trying to find an emergency room. And right, the last thing we want to do is put somebody in an update cycle in the middle of something like that. So we haven't done it before for that reason, but I think there's probably a way to do it that would avoid that situation, but we haven't done it yet.
What's your current headcount across your team to do all that iTriage does? Just kind of get a feel for theirs.
Yeah, so the headcount in our engineering group, including QA, is about 20. And so that's the Rails team, apps team, and infrastructure, so SysOps and DevOps, and QA is about 20 people, and we're planning to go to about 40 by the end of the year. So it's a pretty productive team because it's supporting a pretty good user base, and we're putting out a lot of really great functionality. But of course, like most of you are, right, our backlog is 2 years long. Right? And then that's then there's product management outside of that, and a few other related teams. Yeah, it's all in AWS. Yeah. So basically, we have AWS, and our SysOps architect is here. So I'll give you a naive description of it that you would probably miss at. He can tell you more details. But basically, we have load balancers set up at AWS and then instances behind those. We've gotten pretty much to the point where we can do no downtime releases. We can pull an instance out, update it, put it back in, kind of do that sort of pattern. And then we have an analytics platform that looks at the clickstream data. We're actually replacing that with this new big data platform. We're building that at Amazon. We're using less than Apple's for the guts of that.
So you do all this in-house, but by yourself, or you have a tool in-house?
Yeah, all in-house. We've looked at platform tools like that, but we ended up basically doing all the provision automation with the chef. Yeah, we've basically done all that in-house.
Are you spread across multiple data centers? Like how was your downtime during the apocalypse?
Well, we're spread across AWS between East and West, and fortunately, most of the stuff we really care about is in the West, which has been a little more stable. But we are continuing to work toward getting more cross-geography failover within AWS. I don't think I really see a need to have multiple data center providers. I know some people do that. I understand the rationale for it. I think we can get what we need by doing cross-geography inside of AWS. But that's basically what we've done so far. Yes, sir.
Is your web app on the same release cycle as your iOS mobile apps?
Yes.
It's the same version and all that stuff too?
Yeah. Although I should clarify, today we still have in release the old website that's got the server-generated view pages. The new web app is going to be released in probably the next month and a half. So we are going to put it into that cycle, but it's not in that release cycle yet. But yeah, it will go on the same release cycle with the iOS and Android, which does create a little more pressure for QA, right? We're ramping up our QA group to be able to support, because then you have 3 apps that are all releasing at the same time, and that does put more pressure on QA and product management. So that's something we have to deal with, and we're kind of working up to it.
Just a quick question, just like you just mentioned, did your QA team get a separate QA before each mobile app, or they all kind of, does one person handle all 3?
We have a few QA engineers that go across both mobile apps. It's different for different platforms. So on basically what we've done, and this is another kind of religious area, what we've done is essentially split unit testing and integration testing. So the engineering team does unit testing, Rails and star spec, and iOS and Androids, Androids for body, etc. And then integration testing is handled by QA. We do that because I think, and nothing against tools like Cucumber and those. I think those are terrific tools, and we do use actually some of those, and we do test driven development to an extent, but I really try to offload some of that to QA because I think it leverages developer time, and I think also provides checks and balances, right? Like somebody else testing, they did write it. So that's how we use our QA group, and they are split between web and mobile. So we have QA engineers who focus on web, and they write Selenium tests in Ruby, and then the mobile ones do Monkey Talk with a certain amount of manual testing as well. So we're not to the point of fully automated on mobile yet, but that's the goal. We do a mix of automated and manual on mobile testing, and mostly automated on the Rails side.
You separated certain components out into separate rail decks. Did you also separate the database layer in parallel each time, or did you kind of sometimes leave it in the same database?
Right.
Either way, do you have any issues with the quality of it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was, did we separate? We separated into separate modules, but we separated the database as well. For the new apps that we built, yes. For going through and retooling the old stuff, I think we're going to end up with probably a mix. There are places where it will make sense to split the database out and have it separate. There are places where either that I think probably is not going to make sense, or it's going to be enough work that it won't be worth it. If you think about for us the clinical provider and scheduling, those are all really highly intertwined, right?
Yeah, this way it makes it more like sometimes, and also it's hard to do all the functionality we have because we relies on data sequence. So what was it?
You mean separating the data center?
It's the same levels.
Have you ever had an issue where you made a schema change?
Not yet.
You briefly talked about like the business side of the house, and when you make these big infrastructure changes, were there some challenges you face there as far as like using all your development resources and kind of balancing that out with the company?
Yeah, that's great. So the question was, on the business side of the house, it was difficult to get buy-in to have a significant, percentage of the engineering team working on re-architecture, retooling, and I wouldn't say difficult. I definitely there's an aspect of my job that's internal sales, and I have to get the executive team and the rest of the business on board with doing these kinds of things, and especially when it's a larger project, like when we move to Rails 3, some of these re-architecture things. That definitely takes some buy-in, right? Because I have to go to the product management group and our CEO and say, hey, we need 3 people offline for a month working on this project, right? That can be a hard sell, and really the way I generally do that is try to put it in as concrete business terms as I possibly can. What the benefit, what the cost is going to be, right? This is 2 people for 3 weeks or whatever it is, and or usually a range. You don't know exactly how long it's going to take. It's 2 people and you think it's 3 hours, right? And then what the benefit, more importantly, is going to be, right? So in order for us to be able to continue to have feature velocity in this particular area, because sales needs A, B, and C, right? In the next quarter, we have to be able to do some re-architecture, or else we're not going to build these things, or it's going to take us twice as long, or those kinds of things. Sometimes it's hard to put those in concrete terms, right? Because you have to have enough depth of understanding of what happened behind the scenes to really get it. But that's, so far we've had, especially for a company that was founded by 2 doctors, a lot of times that communication between technologists and clinical people sometimes can be challenging, right? Because they're all smart people, but their domains are very, very different, and it's hard to communicate sometimes. They've been really terrific, and actually, both of them have learned a lot about the technology. They've really absorbed a lot about the technology. I'm not going to have them write code anytime soon, but they've done a great job of kind of understanding how things work and you know, a lot of people fall in the trap of if you don't understand anything, you don't understand how something works, you assume it's easy. These guys actually have been really good about not making those kinds of assumptions. So we, for the most part, have been able to sell that. But that is a really important part of it because, yeah, then otherwise you can have the problem where people are saying, well, you know, where's this feature? What are you guys going to be doing? What's taking so long? They don't really know what's going on. Yes, Brett.
You talk a lot about how your architecture has changed, kind of like your business has changed, but has that push also forced your your development process itself to change as well, or has that kind of stayed the same throughout this?
Yeah, you know, so the question has the change in our business model caused a change in our development process? Not so far. Not so far. I mean, I think we've really, we've just tried to shorten up our cycles. I think it's the biggest thing. And as we've shortened up our cycles, our sales team generally gets happier because they see progress on a more frequent basis. And it allows us to be more, you know, agile. You know, when the business side of the house changes their mind about the priority things, it allows us to more quickly react. But other than that, we've really driven most of that stuff internally from meeting the engineering group based on things that we think are going to help us, you know, do a better job and be happier.
Just a quick question about how 20 people, obviously not that many developers, what do you internally manage the task list or the to-do list with each of them are working? And kind of sync it. I know with the chart center, how do you get down to the nuts and bolts?
Yeah.
That they're all kind of working together.
You know, that's something.
Does it get flow or anything like that?
We're not. This is an area we continue to work on. I think what we do today is pretty good. It's not as good as I'd like. And so we continue to work on it. What we use today is we use Pivotal Tracker, and so we do stories and epics. They actually, I don't know if anybody's here from Pivotal. Okay. It's a really good tool. I like it. Everybody always laments it. They want to take a month and like go right over to the one and talk a month, right? It's hard to find anything out there that's kind of the perfect thing. It's a good tool. We use stories and epics. We got epics out just in time. I was about to switch to something else. And it was that in the next time. And then we do have to do a certain amount of quarterly planning too, which no matter how agile you are, if company gets to a certain size, right, you typically have to do some kind of quarterly roadmap planning. So the way we do that is we plan a quarter, we do it at a really high level, and I try to make sure that it's not planned out to 100%, I try to plan it to 70-80%, so we still have room to make the iterations, you know, change if we need them. And I've never been able to find a tool that does both, right? That does the day-to-day iteration, burn down, and all that kind of stuff, and the higher level stuff. So we're a Mac shop, so I use a tool called Merlin, that I use along with our head of product management and a few other people that are involved in that. We use that for the quarterly planning, and the engineering team almost never sees that. We do go through that plan so they get the big picture and they understand kind of where things are headed, but they don't need to work in it on a daily basis. They see Merlin, so they get the big picture, but they don't ever have to touch it. On the day-to-day stuff that the engineers actually interface with is Pivotal Tracker, GitHub, and all that.
So it's been really affirming hearing your talk because I work at an organization about the same size and is dealing with similar kind of code complexity problems. And I'm interested in hearing more about how you are separating out into the different apps, particularly where it involves services who are both sharing like tightly coupled domain objects. So you indicated that maybe the scheduling and the providers' data models were like tightly coupled, and so it didn't make sense to separate them out in the database. But what were some of the challenges that you faced with that? How you guys solved those? And by the way, we use Jira. It does burn down charts and database stuff. Anyways.
So first of all, thank you. I'm glad it was helpful. And I've used Jira in the past, and that's a really good tool too. And actually, we've been playing around with that a little bit lately. I haven't seen it in a few years. They made some really nice improvements
it takes a lot of play in order to be able to get stuff out of it right.
But I do like the card view that they have. I hadn't seen that before.
Their new rapid boards are really good.
Yeah. As far as some of those challenges, to be honest, what we did first, we took the path of least resistance, right? We started building new things in new apps, right? So when we built our new app, we said, hey, that's a greenfield project. We built that as a new app. Actually, Mike built that. That was still up there. And built that as a separate Rails app. We've done that on a few new projects, and we're in the process of going back and now doing a really part of the traditional stuff. So do you guys want to say anything about that?
Yeah, one of the things that we're doing for some of our search models, at least, to keep them decoupled slightly, is we're leveraging Solar. We're doing all the search, and then that way the updates still stay in the old database, but then the new way, we just have basic data models constructed, and then bring back the data from Solar, look up the ID, and then we have that model. But luckily, that approach is only for the search side. How we're actually going to do that when we start doing updates and everything is going to be a little bit different. So
we're also one of the thanks, Fred. So another thing that we're working on right now is we're retooling our authentication and our user profile. Part of that was to support OAuth 2 for some other reasons that we wanted to. But it's also given us an opportunity to kind of that's a cross-functional thing that touches a lot of things, and so it gave us a good excuse to kind of rip that whole thing out and retool it and get to refactor things that are connected to it. So search is another area. So that kind of those boxes along the top of those shared services, we've been kind of picking those off. And as we're doing those, it gives us a good opportunity to refactor things that are connected.
So, quick follow-up. How important was moving to a unobtrusive web app that consumes a JSON API in facilitating this kind of separation?
I don't think it was required for this, but it was for us. It was really good. I wanted to have a better. That was really the main driver. We wanted to have a better web app, and we wanted to, and that's possible to do from views, right? You can do some really nice stuff on the server. So I'm a huge fan. I've built other apps this way before, and I'm just a really big fan of unobtrusive JavaScript that's real macro and the default ways of operating in Rails. And I just think you can build some really awesome stuff that way. So that was really more the driver. I think we could have still done this modular architecture and still had a huge driven that. But it was kind of a natural extension.
Thank you.
How do you decide on which Android devices to share?
Thank you all so much for your time. I realize we're over time. I'll stay here until I get kicked out for anybody else that wants to ask me questions. So thanks a lot.